I had one woman that was so worried about climate change that she couldn't even imagine a future for farming in England. She thought we wouldn't be able to grow anything here because of climate change. And then I had, on the opposite side, I had one woman who just flat out told me she didn't believe in global warming. Instead of taking land out of farming to do kind of rewilding and tree planting and those kinds of activities, they want to see more like nature-friendly farming practices. These supermarkets making up farms to put on their branding, to make it look like their milk or their eggs comes from like a cute little family farm.
Welcome to the latest episode of Ready, Steady, Green. In this podcast, we are discussing challenges and opportunities of turning climate awareness to climate action. In other words, making sustainability sustainable. We will be focusing on young people as they are the ones who are and will be most affected by the global challenges of today and tomorrow, and they are the ones whose actions can actually change the current trajectory. This is not intended to be a specialist podcast to sustainability experts. Instead, it aims to broaden the discourse and help everyone realize how closely the topics of sustainability, climate, health, quality of life, equality of chances, innovation, technological developments, mindset change are all connected. The episodes from Ready, Steady, Green aim to inspire everyone to step up and step out in their lives and in their communities. If you like what you hear, make sure to follow us. Share it with your friends and invite others to listen as well. You can also listen to our early episodes and feel free to send us a message. Who would you like to invite next as our guest? So welcome to our guest for today, Veronica White. Veronica is a PhD student exploring visions of the future of farming in England, and she's a photographer and an outdoor adventurer all in one. She describes herself as a creative and passionate environmental social scientist, researching visions for the future of farming and food production in England. She's a skilled person in written and visual communication with experience in both corporate and research environments. So welcome, Veronica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining the podcast. Was this introduction about you fair, or was something important missing?
No, I think that all sounds pretty good.
Excellent. We met with Veronica not too long ago when there was a fantastic screening of a film that you did, and it was about the future of farming through the lens of a cyclist. What you did over 80 days and 2,000 miles, you cycled around and interviewed over 50 women who are engaged in farming. How did this idea come about, and what was the whole purpose of this exercise, both physical and intellectual exercise?
Yeah, so this was my PhD fieldwork. So as you mentioned, I'm a PhD student at the University of Exeter, and I knew that in order to explore visions for the future of farming, I wanted to get out and speak to people involved in farming, right? Because if we start thinking about the future of farming, it's those farmers that are going to be impacted the most by any kind of changes to how we farm in the future. So I really wanted to get out and speak to them, but I don't know how to drive. So I grew up in the Netherlands and my family didn't own a car. So I never learned to drive. And as you might know, getting around rural places in England can be quite challenging if you don't have access to a car or can't drive. Public transport in rural areas isn't necessarily reliable, and even if I was able to use public transport, I'd still probably have to walk or get driven to farms because everything's kind of so spread out. So I realized actually cycling was going to be the easiest way for me to actually reach participants across the country. And so that was sort of where the idea first sort of came about. And then I spent the next year bringing that idea to life. So I got to do it last spring. So I spent 12 weeks cycling across England. And yeah, it was an incredible adventure.
I was just about to ask you around the time frame. So you said it took about a year to prepare first, I guess, the concept, and then I believe logistically as well. And then the cycling itself took about 3 months. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I came up with the idea in February 2024, and I set off in mid-April 2025. In that kind of time frame of around a year, I cycled over 3,000 kilometers in training, because even though I grew up cycling in the Netherlands, I didn't cycle really in the UK very much because I was so scared of cycling on the roads. And also I live down in Devon and it's very hilly here, so I was worried about cycling on the hills as well because there's not too many of those in the Netherlands. And so yeah, I didn't really cycle that much when I came up with the idea for this trip. So I knew if I was going to cycle across the country, I'd need to do a lot of training just to build up like the physical strength, but also the confidence to be able to take on a journey like this.
Was it, or did you think it was primarily a physical challenge, or did it turn to be also a mental challenge as well to keep you on the road?
In terms of my fieldwork?
Yes.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was definitely also a mental challenge. I'm actually in the process right now of reading back through all my field notes. So while I was on the road on my field work, I was taking a lot of voice notes and video diaries to kind of record what was happening, what I was seeing. And I've just been going through all of these for the last couple of days. And it is really interesting to see. I think I was maybe struggling more than I realized, or more than I was letting on even to myself. I talk a lot about how tired I'm feeling. I think I was quite lonely spending, 12 weeks cycling on my own. Obviously, I was having all these interviews with incredible women in farming communities. And so any opportunity I had to sit down with another human and just even have a cup of tea and have an interview, like those moments became so meaningful to me to just be with another person. So I think it was a very physically demanding PhD fieldwork, obviously, but as you say, I think it was mentally and emotionally challenging as well.
I can imagine. I mean, I'm an avid cyclist myself, not that long distances, definitely, but I commute every day to the university. I cycle around 250 Ks in a week. And I know how important it is for me. So I can imagine that there is a level at which it helps keep one in physical balance and also somewhat mental balance. Maybe the amount of cycling you did is somewhat stretching that level, but I can imagine some of the challenges. Now, one more thing about cycling before we talk more around sustainability and climate change. Can you help our listeners understand how a typical day of your journey looked like?
So it did sort of vary depending on where I was and whether if I had an interview that day or not. But basically, all of my planning and logistics and recruitment happened while I was on the road. So I'd sort of get up in the morning. I had my overall route already planned. So I'd get up in the morning. I'd sort of look at where I was trying to go that day on the route. I would edit it down so it was just for that specific day instead of, I didn't need it on my phone. I didn't need the route for that week. I just needed the route for that day. And then I'd sort of try and look on Google Maps. I had a couple different maps already saved with places that I could maybe visit on the route, so places to find food, like farm shops. But maybe if there was farms I wanted to visit for interviews, I'd have those kind of already saved. So in the morning, I was really sort of planning the day. I'd pack up my tent and all my camping stuff if I'd camped the previous night and get out on the road maybe like 9 or 10 in the morning. I sort of thought I would be getting out really early to avoid any kind of traffic, but I quickly realized like sleep was so important to me that I didn't want to be like waking myself up early to just get out early. I really just let myself, sleep as long as I could and then took it very easy packing everything up. I wasn't trying to be too rushed. So yeah, get out somewhere between 9 and 10 in the morning. I'd cycle somewhere for lunch. I'd usually have lunch out. And then if I had an interview, maybe I'd have an interview in the afternoon. And then from that farm, I'd then go to wherever I was staying in the evening. So either another campsite or a hotel or staying with like a warm showers host. It really varied day to day. I was typically eating kind of camping meals or pasta, couscous stuff for dinners that I would prepare wherever I was staying, and then lunch I would have out, whatever I could find, which varied massively, kind of depending on where I was. There wasn't necessarily a structure for every single day just because it varied depending on where I was for interviews. Usually there was some cycling involved, and quite often there was an interview or two involved.
All right. One thing that comes through to me is this must have required a very, very high level of focus all along, focusing on the logistics, focusing on your next interview, focusing on some of the basic physical necessities, the lunch and dinner, and where to put up the tent. So in a way, a constant alert. So it's not easy cycling a random in whatever direction, but with a very clear purpose in mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Experience, learn, and interview. Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously like it was my PhD fieldwork, so I was having to be very mindful of like taking photos and reflecting on the landscapes I was cycling through and really making the most of that opportunity that I had. It wasn't, yeah, as you say, it wasn't just like a holiday where I could just go wherever I wanted. And one of the things that was challenging with this was I hadn't really considered how much logistical planning it would involve. And so I sort of thought, oh, when I'm off the bike, I'll be able to rest. And that really wasn't the case. You know, I'd get off the bike in the evening and I'd be having to be on Google Maps and be on Komoot and be on social media, recruiting, working out my route, working out where I was going to stay, working out where I could find food. Like there was just no point where I could fully switch off from either planning the research or thinking about the research. And I'm guessing that's the case for a lot of people on fieldwork, is that it's really hard to actually switch off from being in that like very immersed experience. Mine probably just had a few more logistical challenges because I was having to move every single night and find new places to get food every day.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about what you have found. And we have agreed, and that's important for our listeners to know, we have agreed that we are not looking and not discussing the findings of your PhD research, because obviously this is still in the making, and definitely it would be too early to speak about that. But I think impressions are nevertheless very interesting. So one of the things I was curious about is that the traditional perspective, I think, and the perception of agriculture is that it is men who are there with big, large machineries and industrial agriculture and so on, while as women are the ones who are perhaps involved and engaged in smaller plots with focus on flowers and growing vegetables. Is this a stereotype, or did this prove a true picture?
I think it is very much the image that we still have when we think about farmers, is this very male-dominated kind of industry. And I think to a certain extent that is true. I wouldn't necessarily say that the gender split is how you describe it. I think there's a lot of women that are involved in these large-scale farming, large-scale farms, maybe as sort of not necessarily on the farm, like working on the farm, but managing the farm from within the farmhouse potentially. So there's the women I spoke to held roles across a wide spectrum of kind of from being identifying as a farmer's wife, so managing the house, maybe managing the paperwork for the farm, all the way out to being the sole owner of a farm, completely managing everything, the day-to-day life on the farm. So there's very much a spectrum of how women are involved. And I think it's great to see a lot more women getting involved in farming across those that broad spectrum of roles. I would say it is still probably a male-dominated industry, but the work that women do within that industry, even though maybe it's not recognized as much, is still vitally important. So maybe they're not the face of the farm, but they're the ones managing the farm.
Oh, isn't that familiar? Yeah, yeah. It is so often the situation, isn't it? And in these encounters with women and their various roles within farming, what was it that surprised you the most?
I think it just surprised me how different all the farms were. And I got to see small scale market gardens that are feeding their local communities all the way up to like large scale industrial, arable, horticulture and dairy farms, and kind of a mix of things in between those different scales. And it's just incredible. Like even two dairy farms might be like they're just completely different, like how they're managed, how the animals are treated in terms of like whether they're outdoors year round or they're indoors year round, how the family relationships kind of work on that farm and how that impacts how the farm is managed and run. And then obviously the geographic landscapes that I was seeing were very different. So we've got, the beautiful rolling hills down here in Devon and Cornwall, and then out in the fens, so out east was very, very flat, massive, big arable fields, lots of canals. And then up north, we had the much bigger kind of hills in North Yorkshire and in Cumbria. So just seeing the kind of different physical landscapes that these farmers have to deal with was also really interesting and plays into how that land is managed in each of those places.
Are these farms typically family owned and going from generation to generation?
Yeah, it was a mix. So a lot of the women I chatted to were from farming backgrounds and were either on the farm where they grew up or were had located to a different farm. But a lot of the women I chatted to didn't have farming backgrounds. So there was a few that had done sort of ecology, environmental sciencey type degrees and had realized actually farming is a great way of managing the land and being with the land, having that relationship, or being and working with animals. So I had someone who wanted to be a vet and work with animals and then realized actually being able to be a farmer, you're working with animals every day. So there's lots of different routes into farming that of the people that I chatted to. So that was really inspiring to see as well, like to realize you don't have to come from a farming family to become a farmer. Obviously, that is going to be very beneficial and very helpful to get a leg into the industry. But it's incredible the stories that these women shared of how they managed to start their own farms.
So you have seen real career changes and life changes in these discussions. It's
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. I had one woman who was, I think she did something to do with banking, like in London, and then now has a
Wow.
farm with her husband and is really involved with like getting the community onto the farm and involved with trying to make sure everything she's growing is going to like local restaurants and to local consumers. So yeah,
That's
no,
amazing.
it
That's
is really
amazing.
amazing.
In your discussions that you had with these farmers, to what extent was climate change present? Is this the number one major concern for UK farmers, or are other issues like, I don't know, cost of living and producing or sales opportunities more worrying for them?
Yeah, so it was quite a mix in terms of how people thought about climate change. So I did have quite a few women that were very worried about it. I had one woman that was so worried about climate change that she couldn't even imagine a future for farming in England. She thought we wouldn't be able to grow anything here because of climate change. And then I had on the opposite side, I had one woman who just flat out told me she didn't believe in global warming. So there was definitely a mix of sort of thoughts to do with climate change.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of them recognize that the weather is changing, weather patterns are changing. A lot of people talked about kind of extreme weather, whether that was flooding or droughts. Obviously, when I was doing this last spring, it was very dry.
Yeah,
I think
I
this
remember that.
spring was the warmest and driest in many, many years. So for me, that was fantastic, right? Because I was on my bike and I was like, yes, it's dry. This is great. Obviously, for the farming women I was chatting to, was maybe for some of them that was good, and for some of them they would have liked some more rain. So yeah, it was a mix. I think it is definitely a concern for a lot of farmers in the UK, but it's maybe not the top concern.
So what is the top concern then, or what did come up in your discussions? Not as an overall finding as we agreed, but maybe just, one or
Yeah.
two interesting cases.
Yeah, so I'd say three things sort of came up very regularly. So one of them is to do with food security. The term would be food security, but I think what is meant is like food self-sufficiency. So wanting to make sure that the UK doesn't have to rely so much on imports from abroad, that we're able to grow as much food as we can for the British population here in the UK. So that was one thing that came up a lot. Another thing was around education. So a lot of farmers feel like the public don't respect them. They feel like the public don't understand farming, which I think the latter statement is probably true. But the first part, I think a lot of research suggests the public really do respect farmers. So there's an interesting disconnect there between what the public think and what the farmers think the public think. But yeah, I think farmers really want to see the public better educated on what the realities of farming are. They want to feel more respect from the public and from the government as well. And they want British consumers to buy British products and really, support British farmers through their purchasing decisions. And then the final thing was really around land use and these competing demands for land use. So we've obviously got a finite amount of land here in England, but there's just ever more demands on that land. So whether that's housing, renewable energy projects, rewilding, fracking, there's all these different things that the land needs to be used for.
Very different things.
Very different. Yes. And so the farmers are concerned that all of those demands mean that the land is being taken out of farming, and that's a big concern for them. So in terms of that, what they want to see is more a recognition that, you can have farming that is beneficial for biodiversity and for wildlife. And so instead of taking land out of farming to do kind of rewilding and tree planting and those kinds of activities, they want to see more like nature-friendly farming practices. So those were sort of three themes that did come out in quite a lot of my interviews. I think that I'm not sure that actually answered your question about the challenges.
It absolutely did, and in fact, it also illustrated to me how interlinked these issues are. So one can attempt to separate them, but they are so closely connected as well. And also, I'm wondering with a young person's perspective. To what extent is the English countryside attractive to live there, to work there? Will there be actually a new generation of farmers coming up, or rather young people prefer to go to urban areas and leave farms behind, or they don't want to move there?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is something I thought a lot about personally while I was cycling through all these rural areas. So I think right now farming is very much an aging population or an aging industry. So I think, the average age of a farmer in England is, I think, like over 60 or 65 years old, something like that. It's quite old. And so there is a concern about getting the next generation into farming. And that links very closely with what my participants were talking about with regards to education. They want to see, a lot more farming education in schools, so that inspires young people to want to get into farming. But what I was thinking about as I'm cycling through these rural places, a lot of these villages, the village shop is closed or hasn't been open for years. The village, maybe there's a village pub if you're lucky, but there just doesn't feel like there's a lot of life in these places. But if you were to have a lot more people involved in farming and get more young people back into these rural places, I think that would bring back part of that life. I think, as you say, I think right now, perhaps rural places are not necessarily an attractive place for a young person to want to live. They're poorly connected if you don't drive. There's maybe not a huge amount going on. But, if we could see kind of a renaissance and a resurgence of these rural places, I don't see why they wouldn't be attractive places for young people to live. And I think a lot of young people are getting maybe disillusioned with life in the city and the constant grind and want to have ways of connecting back to nature and connecting to the land. And farming is a great way to do that.
And not only young people. I can very well identify with that one, spending so many hours in offices and artificial spaces and so on. I fully understand that. Now, one thing actually, someone just asked me when I was talking about agriculture with them on a different topic, and they asked me, but agriculture is such an old-fashioned thing and so traditional. There is nothing new. There is nothing modern. There is no technology there. And I told him, even if I don't know the details, obviously, but I told him that, there are examples of a lot of technology there and AI is being used. And I only have some stereotype pictures in my head. I saw some film shots actually from the Netherlands about some really large glass houses where growing of various vegetables is happening and how the whole thing is set up and everything is controlled through computer systems and AI has a role to play. If you were to look at a scale between being very traditional and on the other hand being very technologically driven, where do English farms actually fit on
I
this scale?
think I think again it's all the way across the scale. You have some kind of small farms that are doing everything by hand or maybe even using horses. And then you've got the large scale farms that have these absolutely massive like combine harvesters and are using a lot of technology. There's a lot of kind of satellite imagery tech that you can use to see your different fields, map out the different fields, see where needs irrigation, that kind of thing. There is a big push in the UK for, or at least in England, for more tech, but that's not necessarily welcomed by everyone.
I
And
see.
because for some farmers that feels like just another barrier of their relationship with the land. If
Hmm.
you're not actually out there walking the fields and kind of getting to know your land, and you're just having a drone or a machine do that for you,
Right.
that's taking away your connection with the land. And so yeah, again, technology was another area in my interviews where some people were very, very happy for there to be a lot more kind of tech, and other people were a little bit more hesitant. And I think it also really depends on what kind of farming you do. So,
Hmm.
like, for example, if you're a big arable farmer, there's a lot more tech available for you
Hmm.
than if you're like a small scale upland sheep farmer.
It is very interesting. Just a couple of weeks back, I saw an exhibition, and I think it is yes, it is in the London Science Museum, and the exhibition is about the future of food, and it very dominantly displays a part about historical food production, how it has been produced, and how it then turned into something very industrial, large scale industrial, and where it is leading now in the future with a lot of technology involved and so on. And as with a good exhibition, it has quite a lot of hands-on activities, and especially when younger generations visit, there are some great activities organized for them. There are some incredible pressures on agriculture and food production in general. One being, if I look at a global scale, there is a growing size of population, a growing number of people living on the planet while our resources are limited. That is one very significant strategic issue or fundamental issue that needs to be thought about. The other one being that there is an incredible amount of waste happening in the food industry and in agriculture production. And much of this waste actually is related to transport and all the cost that it carries. So I do remember in one of the interviews you gave, you spoke quite a bit about the importance of local food production and as much as possible limiting the distance the food produce needs to be transported to. So what did you see on these farms? Do they have any chance of selling their produces locally, or are they necessarily being then brought to faraway cities and supermarkets and so on?
So I had a few small kind of market gardens and some like small scale dairy and livestock farms that were selling very locally, whether through meat boxes or veg boxes or just having a little farm shop on at their farm, or a big farm shop. I went to some lovely farm shops on the trip. But then there were others that, especially the big arable, it's a commodity. It's traded on a global market. And that was a challenge that they talked about. You know, they don't get to set the price for their wheat or their barley, because those are traded on such big markets. And yeah, as you say, like, you can't really just sell your wheat to to the local village
No,
as
it's difficult.
easily. But having said that, I actually just read something today about someone up, I think it was in Yorkshire, who started their own mill, and now they actually mill their wheat and make flour, and are trying to get other farms in the local area involved.
Hmm.
So there's something interesting there to think about, like local processing. So even if you have all these farms, if you don't have the ability to process those products locally, then there's no way for them to be sold locally. So
Yeah.
another thing that came up a lot was about like local abattoirs. So a lot of small scale abattoirs have been closing, and so people are having to put their livestock on, into their trucks and drive even further in order to have them killed. And, that's obviously a stressful experience for the animal, and not necessarily a positive experience for the farmer either. So having the kind of small scale local processing and retailing infrastructure is really important if we want to kind of move towards a more small scale local food system.
This interestingly coincides with some other thoughts around how important community-based thinking is. I just attended a lecture where someone was speaking about community-based energy constructs and energy grids, and focusing on the needs of the local community and producing it locally, which is very similar to what you just described now with farming and food production. So I think if we were able to somewhat step away from these large-scale national global systems and think on a local and community level, this could be the solution to some of the challenges that we face right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, one more thing that I wanted to ask before I have and share a little surprise with you, and but before that, one more question. I'm quite much involved with sustainability education, and I work with both undergraduate and postgraduate students in helping them understand, and not only understand, but become as much as possible aware, and if that is the case, concerned and ready to act in terms of sustainability challenges, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and so on. Now, my question to you is, with you having seen so many things firsthand and experiencing things for yourself, would you say that field trips can be an important element in sustainability education and raising sustainability awareness, for example, on challenges related to the climate emergency or understanding weather patterns better and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think any opportunity we have as academics, as researchers, as students, to get outside of the kind of boundaries of our university or our institutions, I think should be welcomed. And, getting the opportunity to go out and speak with real people that are involved in these kinds of systems that we're researching, I think is really valuable. I'd say personally, I think we should be looking for local ways to do that. So obviously sustainability was another big motivator for why I decided to use a bike for my PhD research instead of, flying off somewhere to the other side of the world to do my field work.
Hmm.
And, I think I really want to try and inspire especially students, but kind of researchers more broadly, to try and think about expeditions and field work we can have locally. How can you turn something that maybe seems a bit boring into a fun adventure? And so for me, that just involved getting on my bike instead of trying to travel by bus or something. So I think, as we're trying to limit our own personal carbon footprint, it is important to talk about the sustainability of field work and field trips. So if you can find a way to get out of the university and do field work in a sustainable way, then I think that's incredible.
I think that's a very good example of making a piece of research authentic and grant credibility to it, because the way how you actually did the field trip and collected data supports the core message very, very strongly, and that is around sustainability. So that's
Yeah, and
great.
I think it was also for me like the trip and the fact I was willing to put in this physical effort to get out to these farms was really beneficial in like recruiting people. Farmers are becoming increasingly hard to recruit for research because they're such an oversampled population. But the fact that I was just sort of showing up on my bike, I think got people
Hmm.
quite excited about getting involved. And it's a bit, it's a bit different, a bit wacky. So it's fun to be involved in a project like that, and yeah, to get the opportunity to do things like this podcast, and to have my film shown at the RGS, all these kinds of opportunities that have arisen because of the fact I just got on my bike. So yeah, I definitely encourage your students to to think about
Excellent.
some cycling based
I
fieldwork.
w- that's a very good message, and I will definitely share it in class. We'll see how it goes down. Obviously, not everyone is that keen on cycling, but it's a fantastic way to get to know your environment, the community, and so on. And I can well imagine that farmers were more open to you once you knocked on their door and had to park your cycle somewhere. It's just funny. Okay, so a little surprise for you. This is our seventh episode of Ready, Steady, Green, and I would like to bring a couple of terms or just one word, all starting with the seventh letter of the alphabet, which is letter G.
Okay.
And I'm curious to hear from you in max 1 minute each, what associations these bring to you and what comes to your mind in relation to sustainability. So, in other words, we're looking for sustainability related G letter words. So,
Okay.
you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, the first one, and I'm curious to hear what your associations and thoughts are, is global warming.
I knew this was going to be the first one. As soon as you said
Yeah,
G, I was like,
it's
it's
pretty
going to be
obvious,
global
isn't it?
warming. I think I don't have a positive association with that term because I seem to think that people that use the term global warming don't believe in climate change, which isn't necessarily
Hmm.
true. And I know that global warming is used, in some science because that's what is actually happening. Um, but like for me, I would always use the term climate change
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like global warming is what skeptics use.
Oh, that's a very interesting
What do
thought.
you think? Do you have that impression as well?
Well, definitely, I would say that global warming is more controversial in its use than climate change is. In the case of climate change, it's the division line is rather between somewhere using the term climate change or climate emergency, and that in itself reflects where they stand on it, or how strongly they feel about it, or how acute they find the problem. But with global warming, I agree. Some people right away say that, what are you speaking about? We had a colder winter than we ever did, or this was not warmer than previously, just we had 3 times more rain, and that's why. So it does give place to some debates, which are always good. If you think back, actually, and I'm not sure if it is easy to recall, but did you hear first about global warming or climate change, or
I feel like when I first learned about it was global warming.
yeah, yeah. I tend to think that it's somewhat waning or fading out, and clearly not that frequently used today. Anyway, thank you for that. The second one is, and I'm not sure you guessed this one, is it's a concept of green spaces. What are your thoughts on that?
Green spaces in terms of like nature spaces in,
Yes,
yeah.
in everywhere. Yeah,
I
or
mean, I
anywhere.
think we could use more green spaces, especially in cities, would be fantastic. Or having access to green spaces, I think, is the issue.
Mm,
Is that a lot of especially in England, a lot of the countryside is private and there's no right of access to the public in those spaces. And even where there is right of ways, a lot of the time those aren't maintained or um, become inaccessible. And I think there's issues to do with that. So I think green spaces are really beneficial for our mental well-being. Just being able to get out and be in nature, I think is really really beneficial. So I'd like to see more easy access to green spaces for people, especially young people.
I fully agree. And in fact, I also believe that this again is a global problem. And in so many countries around the world, it is a major issue that people do not have enough opportunities to actually visit green spaces. And that is really bad for mental well-being and exercise and all these important consequences. In fact, I just read a piece which discussed the situation of, I believe, Jamaica in the Caribbean, and which said that until about 100 years ago, all beaches of the island were public and accessible to everyone. And now it is 3% of the beaches that are
Oh my
accessible to
gosh.
everyone because they have all become part of property development, private property development, and there is no more access. So it's a very different type of green space issue, but the core element of it is the same. If people do not have the opportunity to visit these and own these green spaces in large numbers and to a significant extent, then that has some very, very bad consequences and backlashes. Thank you. And I have one more with letter G, and that is around greenwashing. And I'm especially interested if this term of greenwashing came up in any of the discussions in your farming interviews.
I'm not sure greenwashing came up, but farm washing came up. That's not
Okay.
that's
Letter
not
F,
a
that is
G.
also acceptable.
And that's the idea of like these supermarkets making up farms to put on their branding, to make it look
Oh,
like
okay.
their milk or their eggs comes from like a cute little family farm, and like they've just fully made up that farm. It does not exist. Riverford's done a lot of work on that topic if anyone wants to to read more about farm washing. But then in terms of greenwashing, I mean, I don't like greenwashing. I wish companies didn't do greenwashing. A lot of these companies aren't very transparent about where they're sourcing things from or how things are being produced. And so, we only have the information they provide us, right? And yeah, I don't know if we can trust that necessarily. So I think, yeah, greenwashing is definitely an issue. And my research group that I'm associated with here at the university does a lot of research on the communication of climate change. And so not necessarily about greenwashing, but about kind of misinformation and disinformation within climate comms. And I'm guessing greenwashing falls into some of those kinds of narratives as well.
What is the name of this research group you are part
Yeah,
of?
I should have said it's the Center for Climate Communication and Data Science, so C3DS.
Oh, that's a very interesting combination, communication and data science. It tells
Yeah,
right away what aspects or what methodology you are focusing on.
yeah.
Very,
So
very
it's a
interesting.
combination of social scientists and computational scientists using kind of both qualitative and kind of large model and AI tools to study climate comms.
All right. Getting towards the end of our podcast, I would like to turn now our attention a little bit to the future and get us do some stargazing or crystal ball looking. And so, if you were to think about an ideal world, what should people be doing if they want to act on climate change in an ideal setting? What steps should they make in their individual lives? Any suggestion, advice, insights from your side?
Yeah, so I think I would say support your local farmers if you can and reduce your meat consumption. So if you can buy kind of locally produced, like from a butcher meat, that's fantastic. If you know where that meat's come from, that's even better. I think that's one way that we can reduce our impact on the environment. I'm not saying you need to cut out meat entirely, because I think there is a role for livestock here in this country. So if you can find local meat, that's great. Obviously take a look at how often you're flying. So like I don't fly within Europe, which I know that's like it's a privilege, you know, to be in that position, to be able to take trains. Not everyone is in that position. But if you can find slower ways of traveling, there's a lot of benefits that aren't just environmental to traveling in a slow way. And then I guess talk about these topics, right, with people. I guess that's what this podcast is about, right?
Yeah.
Talking about these things. A lot of the conversations that we have about sustainability and climate change quite often end with the only solution is bringing down capitalism. So maybe that's as far as I should go.
No, I fully recognize there is a very strong social and political movement also associated with this. And in many respects, I understand what the grounds of this are. Myself being in the business school at Roehampton, obviously it is a more diverse approach that we take, and clearly there are recognizable differences in approaches to this. But one thing I can definitely tell when I attended COP26 in Glasgow, that is where I came across a lot of the voices which were strongly anti-capitalist, anti-market, anti-private whatevers, and a lot of focus was given to community-based solutions. And regarding these solutions, I sympathize with them a lot, even if some of the founding data or founding thoughts I do not concur with. But nevertheless, thank you. These were some very great suggestions regarding for individual action. Now, in the next step in the same ideal world scenario, what should governments be doing differently, in your view, if they wanted to act on climate change?
I mean, I think the first things would be taxing the rich and finding ways to make corporations pay for the environmental damages that they've caused, like hold those companies to account. Because yes, we all individually contribute to emissions and contribute to climate change, but those companies are the ones that have caused the bulk of the emissions, and they're the ones that really need to be forced to change. I think within farming, I'd like to see more funding going towards kind of regenerative and agroecological practices, environmentally kind of sustainable farming practices. You know, a lot of farmers really like they care about the natural environment, they care about the land, but they're so financially stretched that they maybe don't have the capacity to implement some of these changes. So if they were being kind of financially rewarded for environmental actions, I think that's great. And we need more of that instead of just throwing all of the money into developing technologies that may or may not save us. I think, yeah, protections on for small family farms so that they can continue, and instead of just being bought up by mega farms or corporations that are buying land for carbon credits. What else? I know there's a big push within the farming kind of industry to get farming included in the national curriculum. That's something that a lot of people are talking about right now. What else?
Oh, that's quite a long list actually in itself, and it was interesting. The first one you started with, this full price concept, so that emissioners should pay and companies should bear the bulk of the cost of all the damage that is done to the environment. It coincides beautifully with what one of our earlier speakers was speaking about on this podcast, Leo Rayman. He spoke about the full price concept and why it is important to include all the social and environmental costs in every product that is being produced. And it's also important for us as consumers to bear the total cost in mind. So it's one thing that the companies produce those things, and therefore we put blame on them. But let's face it, us as consumers, we always have the choice as well, or in the majority of the cases, we do have a choice. So what is it that we pick off the shelf, or we don't do any shopping in the supermarket at all? From where else we get our groceries, or what bank we use, what means of transport we use, and so on. With each and every step, we make a choice and we cast a vote, don't we? So I think responsibility is also on us in this way as individuals. And especially if we organize ourselves into communities, we have a much bigger weight in this respect as well.
Yeah, and the biggest impact we have is also through our vote, right? Like
Absolutely.
I'm an immigrant here, so I'm not allowed to vote in UK elections, but I know who I would not be voting for if I could vote.
Okay. But we can still vote in the local elections, so here in the UK. So that is an opportunity for community-based activities. Now, there was originally a third leg of this question, and it would have been around the responsibility and action of what businesses should be taking. But we covered this quite a bit. If you want to add anything to how you see what businesses and other organizations should be doing differently if they wanted to act on climate change and support a sound future of our globe.
Yeah, I just say like supermarkets, obviously like within the food system, supermarkets have such immense power. And I think if they could, better support the farmers that they work with, I think that would be a good first step.
Mm-hmm. But not the farms which are on the labels, as you said, but the real farms.
The real farms, yeah, not the imaginary farms that they've made up.
All right. Now, one thing before we leave, you spoke about a few things, and I will definitely put some of these into our podcast notes, but I just wanted our listeners to hear from you. So where can they watch first this film that you produced about your cycle tour and the field research that you did and you're currently working on?
Yeah, so the video is on YouTube. So if you just search the Farming Futures Cycle Tour, it will come up on YouTube. And I've also got an Instagram page and a Facebook page where you can follow along. And those are kind of where I'll be sharing updates as I continue to do my analysis and share my findings more publicly.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I will not ask you now about your future plans, but I'm very interested in inviting you back, let's say in a year's time when your PhD is already in the past and you have happily completed it and earned your degree. And then we might have another discussion and see where you cycle next. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much for coming along, Veronica. Thank you all for listening to our podcast today. If you liked it, please make sure to follow it, share it with your friends, and invite others to listen as well. You can also listen to our earlier episodes and feel free to send me a message. Who would you like to invite as the next guest? Help us get the message through. We all need to act on sustainability now. This was Gabor Sarlos with Ready, Steady, Green. Bye for now.